Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard Gaming. Today I've got a review of a new game for you, one that hasn't even launched yet, but will be out in just a couple of days at the time I record this on all major platforms. What you're looking at here is a modern run-and-gun game called Iron Meat, and I'll tell you all about it and whether or not it's worth getting. I'll be discussing the PC and Switch versions of this game in this review. First up, you may be thinking you've played enough Contra-alikes with stuff like Blazing Chrome and Super Cyborg. If you think that,
well, you're wrong!
Iron Meat from Retroware is another game that is heavily based on Konami's run-and-gun classics that I'll spoil right now and tell you gets most of it right. But let's delve into it a little bit deeper and not get ahead of ourselves here. Before I go on, in the interest of full disclosure, I did receive review copies of this game for both PC and Switch, and I'll be discussing both of those versions in this review as I pointed out. No one is seeing this video or its script in advance before it goes live, and all opinions are of course my own, and no, I didn't get paid a cent for this. The visuals in Iron Meat are pretty good and reminiscent of a high-end 16-bit title, but are tastefully modernized a bit beyond that, with more overlapping layers of parallax scrolling than you get in something like a Genesis or SNES game. There are also multiple layers of rotation, giant enemies, and occasionally more on-screen chaos than either of those systems could have handled. Beyond that stuff, the visual style is really spot on. I'd say the appearance of Iron Meat skews a little bit more towards Contra Hardcore on the Genesis than Contra 3 on SNES. Now, 16-bit-like visuals have become pretty commonplace in new games today, and Iron Meat doesn't stand out a ton based on its graphics alone, but it does look good, and fans of the run-and-gun genre will really appreciate it. There are lots of little touches you might miss, like small destructible cameras and lights in the background that don't affect gameplay at all, but really help add to the overall atmosphere of the game. There are just so many of these little details that are easy to miss if you're not paying attention. I should probably also point out there's a lot of cartoon blood and gore in this game, so if that turns you off, Iron Meat might not be for you. You'll find lots of dripping blood, enemies that die in gruesome ways, and your own characters can be cut in half when they die, for example. But everything is so cartoony and pixelated that I think most people will probably be okay with it. Still, if that's not you, you've been warned. We also get this neat little animated scene when the game first launches. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any more of it for an ending. I've beaten the game about 8 times or so at this point, so it's possible there's more to do or something that I missed, but it sure doesn't seem like it so far. As far as little visual extras go, you can go into the options and turn on a CRT filter if you want, but personally, I loathe CRT filters and would rather tear out one of my fingernails than use one. But hey, if you like them, they've got it here for you. So the biggest complaint I can level against the graphics in Iron Meat is that the color palette is a little too desaturated and samey throughout. You'll see an awful lot of muted purples, blues, and muted greens or browns. By the halfway point, I felt like my eyes could have really used a bit of a palette cleanser, so to speak. Oh, the game also sometimes either zooms closer to the action or further away from it, sometimes for the length of an entire level. Personally, I didn't have any problems with it, and the change of perspectives does help vary things a little bit, in my opinion. The soundtrack is very well done and fits the style of the game perfectly. You get a choice between modern and 16-bit versions of the soundtrack too, which is always cool. The modern music is full of hard rockin' distortion guitar tunes, and they're all pretty great. I do have to admit though that none of them stood out as especially memorable to me, but I do enjoy hearing them while I'm playing the game. The retro versions of the songs are pretty good too. Many sound way different, but they don't sound exactly like they're coming from any particular retro system. For example, you'll get NES-style PCM percussion, occasionally mixed with SNES or Genesis-like instruments, mixed with a few instruments that sound a little too high fidelity for either of those systems. It still sounds cool, but I do prefer the modern soundtrack in this case. Sound effects are fine and fit the action well, with lots of explosions and gunshots and little tink-tink sounds and things like that. We've established that Iron Meat looks and sounds pretty good, so how's the gameplay? I'm happy to report that it's also really good. If you're a crusty old retro gamer like me, here's how I can best describe Iron Meat for you. It plays like something of a half-step between the NES Contra titles and Contra 3 on SNES. For those of you to whom those references mean nothing, it's a very traditional run-and-gun that focuses on the basics. It doesn't involve itself with varied play mechanics, or moves like climbing walls or sliding or anything like that. You run, you jump/flip, you shoot, and that's it. The controls are absolutely spot on and feel fantastic. It's really responsive, and for the most part, if you die, it's your fault. A few minor exceptions I'll talk about in the next segment. The controls are also kept simple. The D-pad or analog stick moves your character, there's an attack and a jump button on the face of the D-pad, the L1 and R1 bumpers or shoulder buttons, whatever you want to call them, change between the two weapons that you can carry at one time, while the L2 and R2 triggers lock you into place so you can fire diagonally without moving. Let's talk weapons next. You start out with a standard machine gun that works just like the ones in Contra 3 or Contra Hardcore, but it's a bit slower than in those games. You can pick up an upgrade to that fires it a little bit faster. There's also a spread laser that incorporates some randomness into the angle of firing, but it's basically like a lower firing rate version of the spread gun from Contra. There's also a Contra-style laser that works exactly like the ones from the two major 8-bit titles, Contra and Super C. There's a wave gun that looks an awful lot like the wave beam from Thunder Force 3. There's a sort of grenade launcher thing also, and finally, there's this swirling energy gun thing. Each weapon can be powered up one time a la Super Contra in the arcade. The firing color changes from blue to green, and you'll normally either get a higher firing rate, extra damage, extra projectiles, or some combination of those things. There are also a couple of temporary timed power-ups. The first one gives you rapid fire like the arcade or NES Contra and NES Super C, but unfortunately it only lasts a few short seconds. There's a second temporary power-up that fires single bullets in multiple different directions at once all around you. It's sort of like having the armor suit in Capcom's side-scrolling game Sidearms, if you're familiar with that one. Finally, you can also pick up a power-up for points, which can help you get extra lives during a level or unlock more things after it. When it comes to the levels themselves, there are 9 of them in total. Overall, I'd say the level design is excellent, with just a few minor caveats. Many of the levels are reminiscent of those found from run-and-gun games of the past. Aside from typical left-to-right levels, there are also a few levels that auto-scroll upward a la NES Super C with a few breaks for you to take out a bunch of enemies. Levels sometimes also have large sub-bosses, and the actual bosses are often giant, creative, interdimensional horrors where some form of biological entities have merged with mechanical vehicles. Now, they aren't all like that. Sometimes you'll even battle just a regular-sized human as a boss fight, but they're all very well done and very pattern-based. So if you get killed a lot, during a boss fight, just stick with it, observe, and you'll eventually get better. And next, let's talk about the difficulty. Now, I've played Iron Meat on normal and hard a number of times. On normal, you get 16 lives for each level. You can earn extra lives as you progress through the levels and earn points. Honestly, on normal, it's not a very hard game, and I beat it on my first try without ever losing all of my lives. On hard, you get 8 lives, and there are several changes. Some enemies leave behind components that can kill you, some have faster firing rates, some have faster projectile speeds, some have a combination of these things. Bosses and mini-bosses often have extra hit points in this mode too, where they'll take a lot of extra damage to take down. Now, speaking of extras, as far as extras go, they seem to mainly come in the form of skins for this game. As you make your way through Iron Meat, there's sort of an experience system where the points you earn fill up a meter at the end of a level. Each time you completely fill a meter, you unlock a new skin. Some of them are pretty wacky, and I'm showing you just a few examples here. Now, as far as I've seen, they are literally just skins. They don't affect the gameplay directly in any way. You can also mix and match body parts from any unlocked skins if you're a crazy person. The game also has its own in-game achievement system, so Switch owners can get in on the wacky achievement fun also. You can probably already tell that I think Iron Meat is a really good game, and it definitely is. But does it have any flaws? There are just a couple of things that slightly hold it back in my opinion. Not by a lot, but there's some minor dings in the otherwise fine shell of this title. First up, level length. Each level typically takes somewhere from 5 to 7 minutes to complete depending on your skill and how fast you're able to dash through it. You can expect a typical playthrough to take roughly about an hour, especially your first few times through. Some of the levels do feel a little bit overly long, and I kind of wish they'd ended a minute or two sooner than they did. Next up, there's a minor lack of gameplay variety here. When you look at the games that inspired Iron Meat, namely the Contra series on multiple platforms, they often did something to shake the action up. Whether it was changing your perspective to go into the screen, or have overhead screens, or riding vehicles, they did stuff to vary up the gameplay. Iron Meat doesn't do any of that. You just get 9 straight action levels that either scroll left to right or bottom to top. Now, the gameplay is extremely refined and a lot of fun, but it feels like it could have used a couple of short, varied levels just to break things up a bit. Now, if you do get tired of the game, you can stop it at any time, and when you come back again, you can start Iron Meat from any level you've reached or completed, I forget which. The only other thing I want to mention here is that there are times when some enemies, bullets, or obstacles will blend in a little bit with the muted backgrounds, and you won't see what even killed you. It'll become less of a problem as you become more familiar with the levels, but it's still frustrating on those increasingly rare occasions where it does happen. Now, all the footage you've seen in this video comes from the Steam version of the game on PC. Why? Because it doesn't look or perform any different on Switch than it does on PC. It also works great on the Steam Deck, by the way. It's not listed as officially compatible as of the time that I wrote this review, but I played through it twice on the Steam Deck in standard old SteamOS without any problems whatsoever. And the only real difference between the Switch and the PC versions of the game that I can tell you about is that it takes considerably longer to load on Switch than it does on PC. So you might be waiting 1 or 2 seconds on loading screens on the PC version, you might be waiting 5 to 8 seconds on the Switch for a load to complete. But once you're in-game, everything is fine. There's no pausing, there's no slowdown, there's no discernible difference from the PC version at all. So if you're wondering which platform to buy Iron Meat for, hey, it's up to you. I haven't seen the game on the PS5 or Xbox platforms, but I'm sure it runs just as well on those as it does on all the others, considering it uses very few CPU and GPU resources. Alrighty, so that's Iron Meat in a nutshell. I'll sum everything up briefly and give it my review score. Iron Meat is a Contra-style run-and-gun that borrows liberally from various entries of Konami's classic run-and-gun series, but is executed so well that anyone who appreciates the genre at all will really, really like it. It's polished way more than most of the other Contra-alikes, and the game is just exquisitely balanced. It looks really nice with lots of neat little touches, it sounds really nice, and the gameplay is probably the best of any run-and-gun I've played in a few years. There's a lot to like about Iron Meat. On the downside, some of the levels do feel like they're just a little bit too long. In the early going, you'll probably get shot a few times and have no idea what killed you, since some things can blend in with the background a little bit. But that is alleviated by just playing the game more and learning where enemies are. Iron Meat could also have used a few levels with different play mechanics to break up the action a bit, because as good as it is, it did start to wear on me before the end, even on my first time through. Also, if you're turned off by pixelated blood and gore, this one is not for you. With all of that considered, I'm giving Iron Meat a review score of 8 out of 10. It's a really fun game that stands as one of the best modern examples of the genre. It runs great even on the Switch, so there's no reason not to give this one a try. I don't regret 1 second of the time I spent playing Iron Meat, and I don't think most other action game fans will either. Now it's your turn. Have you played Iron Meat yet? Have you been looking forward to this game's release for a while? Is it the best Contra-like game that you've played? Tell me all about it in the comments. That'll do it for this video, my current and retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed it, please like and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss any of my videos. If you want to help support the work that I do here, you can do that on Patreon, Ko-fi, or right here on YouTube through channel memberships and stuff like that. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.